Now to our deep dive into these historic impeachment hearings. We're going to tell you everything you need to know about how the president's own Pentagon and his own security staff detailed a plot to extort foreign help to cheat in the re-election campaign. For the first time this week, we saw Trump's own staff saying under oath the plot was not a shadow policy. It was the ordained policy of the Trump administration. As memorably said, quote, everyone was in the loop. So here we go. 12 witnesses, 30 hours of testimony, and many people distinguished themselves from even their more powerful bosses who remain in a kind of bureaucratic hiding because remember how a lot of this ended this week. Afterwards, we saw witnesses walk out of the doors of Congress to hail an iconic red taxi of Washington. Now, what did they leave behind? A string of explosive revelations, evidence, and receipts, including Trump's handpicked Ambassador Sondland, who walked into Congress and dropped a dime on his boss at the worst possible time. This is what it sounds like when someone confesses in public.
Was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously, with regard to the requested White House call and the White House meeting, the answer is yes.
Wow. How do you confess that this week and get away with it? Well, look, Sondland could be naive about some things. He's not dumb. He came in with larger names than his own. And that is the other big thing that comes out of this week. An ambassador to Donald Trump detailing who was in on the plot, naming names. And according to Sondland, it was everyone.
Mr. Giuliani, President Trump, Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Perry, Brian McCormick, Ms. Kenna, Chief of Staff Mulvaney, and Mr. Mulvaney's senior advisor, Rob Blair, and Ambassador Taylor, Ambassador Volker, a lot of senior officials. Everyone was in the loop.
Now, what if Sondland is just trying to save himself and take those shots at people? Well, he brought the proof, the emails, the text messages showing those names you just heard were working directly on the plot with Sondland and Trump. Even before the infamous call teeing up the extortion of Ukraine to get Biden, he showed, like in a high-level email, that Mulvaney, Rick Perry, and Sondland's own direct boss, Pompeo, were all involved. There was a whole scheme there to get the Ukraine leader to, quote, assure Trump he intends to run the investigation. They all were on that email. Sondland also busting Mulvaney for confirming it with action because he replied and directed the National Security Council to, quote, set up the call. As Sondland named names, other witnesses corroborated this plot, telling Congress those same officials, so you're stacking evidence here, were undercutting national security for Trump's political errands to get Biden.
He was being involved in a domestic political errand, and we were being involved in national security foreign policy, and those two things had just diverged.
A lot of this caught Republicans off guard, especially the Sondland bombshells, and they are scrambling to respond in real time over the course of the week, putting the Trump administration and Trump's defenders in a tough spot. Why would Sondland, Trump's own hand-picked point person on Ukraine, admit the worst things that have been said about his plotting, things that look bad? Why would he do that if it weren't true? Well, in court, this is called an admission against interest. If you admit something bad about yourself, it's considered more credible than if you're just defending yourself or bragging about how great you are. The reason makes sense, whether you're a lawyer or not. You have no biased logic to just confess or criticize yourself falsely in most situations. Why am I telling you this? Well, this type of testimony, this type of statement is considered so credible. If you make an admission against interest, it's even admissible as an exception to a word we've heard a lot lately, hearsay. Although I would add, a lot of what Sondland said is under oath and about himself, so it wasn't hearsay to begin with. Now, this evidence also sheds light on another bizarre part of the attacks on Trump in the Ukraine scandal, because it was an attack that came from his own number one employee, White House aide Mick Mulvaney, admitting that plot in order to defend it.
Did he also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely. No question about that.
But to be clear, what you just described is a quid pro quo.
We do that all the time with foreign policy. That's it. And that's why we held up the money.
That's it. That's why we held up the money. You know, that was seen as an inexplicable gaffe at the time. Trump's lawyers rebuked Mulvaney. He then walked it back. So now, as we think about everything that's happened in the past weeks, do you remember how odd it was when Mulvaney first stepped to that lectern? But think about what we know now. that Mulvaney knew then while he spoke. He knew there were receipts. He knew there was written email evidence already tying him to setting up the quid pro quo bribery plot. He knew that then, and that it was only probably a matter of time until it all came out. So Mulvaney had his own interests in trying out any defense, no matter how bizarre or how guilty sounding, to say, well, maybe what he did was okay, instead of denying that it happened, because he knew Sondland had the emails that showed it happened. Remember how Mulvaney also tried to break with the White House over the lawsuits on whether to testify? Well, that makes more sense now, too. Mulvaney has been thinking about how to get around this evidence the whole time. This week also eviscerated once and for all Trump's defense that he wanted investigations to address foreign corruption and not score domestic points, because Sondland and others revealed Trump didn't even care if there was an investigation, that it actually occurred, only that there was American TV coverage of a Biden probe.
He had to announce the investigations. He didn't actually have to do them, as I understood it.
Giuliani and President Trump didn't actually care if they did them, right?
I never heard, Mr. Goldman, anyone say that the investigations had to start or had to be completed. The only thing I heard from Mr. Giuliani or otherwise was that they had to be announced in some form, and that form kept changing.
Announced publicly?
Announced publicly.
So it was all about the public television discussion of the Bidens being dirty and under investigation, not about whether there was one. Sondland's account confirmed by another diplomatic official.
This was a demand that President Zelensky personally commit on a cable news channel to a specific investigation of President Trump's political rival.
And you don't need only the hearings to confirm this up. That cable news channel, CNN, has disclosed that they did have a planned interview where the Ukrainian president was apparently going to reveal all this.
We now know for months the Trump White House had been mounting an intense campaign to force him to publicly announce those investigations. His team apparently concluded that since he was planning an interview with me anyway, that would be the forum in which he would make the announcement.
That would be the forum. All of this to benefit Trump. That's a question that came up and was also answered. Take a look at this exchange.
Who would benefit from an investigation of the Bidens?
I assume President Trump would benefit.
There we have it, see? Didn't hurt a bit, did it?
Didn't hurt a bit. Well, it may not have hurt the witness. It hurt the president a lot. So we just showed you every single key substantive highlight about the Ukraine plot. That's what they were trying to do. And then what happened when they got caught? What did they do about that? Everyone remembers the cover-up being worse than the crime for Watergate. Well, Sondland argued, and he still works for Trump, that there may be another article of impeachment against Trump. He didn't use those words, but he spoke to something everyone in the room understood, that open defiance can become obstruction. And he, Sondland, explained he didn't like that, and he didn't like being held back from full cooperation with evidence.
I have not had access to all of my phone records, State Department emails, and many, many other State Department documents. My lawyers and I have made multiple requests to the State Department and the White House for these materials. Yet these materials were not provided to me.
I believe that those who have information that the Congress deems relevant have a legal and a moral obligation to provide it.
A legal obligation. The president hasn't been doing that. Instead, he's been doing talking points. These notes went viral this week. It's literally Donald Trump writing down what he told Sondland after they got caught and quoting himself as a kind of defense. He has every right to plead not guilty, but pleading not guilty is not evidence. It's just words. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.